Welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, this weekly news magazine for a Mother's Day weekend. Thank you for joining us and putting us in part and parcel of it. If your mom is anything like mine, you've had a lot of these conversations with her. All right, maybe I'm unusual to that. Our next guest is Lawrence Mead, professor of politics and public policy at New York University, and he's got a book coming out called Burdens of Freedom, Cultural Difference and American Power. Professor Mead, thank you for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
Fine, thank you.
So we've often spoken in terms of the rights and responsibilities, and that our friends from the left tend to go all running around the fields on everybody's rights and what is a right, and you have a right to a job and a right to health care and all these things that you have rights to. And very few people talk about the responsibilities that come with those rights. Is that sort of the genesis of your book?
Well, actually, I wouldn't think so.
Okay.
The political issue that you describe is a conventional one within American politics, in which both sides are, in my terms, individualist. Mm-hmm. That is, they think of society as full of individuals seeking their own goals, and the left wants government to help them in various ways which the right might resist. Although that's true, they don't really differ about culture, about what they think ways of life should be in this country. What's much more important from my point of view is that there's aspects of American society and also the outside world which are really not individualist, which don't think of life in these terms at all. And the origin of that isn't really that they are being, let us say, mollycoddled by an indulgent government. It's rather that they came from outside Europe. They didn't come to America from Europe, which is the creation of American culture. Mm-hmm. So they're coming from other parts of the world where we don't think of life in individualist terms. And that's the big contrast that I'm pointing to.
Now, when you talk about it, are you talking about it as immigrants coming to this country, learning this way? Because this has always been a struggle as we debate illegal versus legal immigration, is that there is a process by which the new immigrants, and every July 4th we celebrate the country's birthday here in Charlottesville with an amazing ceremony of those who have gone through the process and worked so hard to learn. And often I find those are the folks who know more about American civics than high school kids in the United States. Yeah.
Well, see, immigration has changed its nature. It used to be that most of those 100 years ago came to America were coming from Europe, and so they shared much of the same individualist culture that formed the country back in the 18th, 19th century.
Okay.
Today, however, since in the last 50 years, since 1965, the immigrants are coming from the non-Western world, from Asia and Latin America. And those cultures are quite different from Europe. They're really not about individuals getting ahead and working out their own purposes in life. That's very much a Western idea. The non-West thinks in terms of adjustment to the environment. You really expect to conform to what other people expect of you and what the world expects from you. And you don't really think of life in terms of change. Your goal is to survive, to get through. The Western idea, the American idea of seeking life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's much more ambitious. And the West is unique in having conceived of an idea of life like that. So though that idea was the making of Americans, the reason we're a dominant country, but today we have growing elements in our society which really come from a different way of life. It's not just immigration. It's also people who've been here for a long time, minorities in general, but also part of the working class, which is going downhill and deciding not to really try to get ahead anymore, withdrawing from work. So America in general is losing an individualist mindset at the bottom of the society while maintaining it at the top level. So we have an increasing difference within the country about what life's about.
When you talk about the Western way, and truly the essence of conservatism is conserving that Western idea of individual freedom and liberty, how is it we have failed? Is it because we've ignored the realities of poverty? Have we allowed ourselves to, calcify a free market that has become increasingly cronyist, allowing the leftists to point to wealthy people and saying, see, they've got theirs and you don't get any fruit of their labor. Are any of these part and parcel of what you're talking about?
Not really. See, that's a partisan issue within the mainstream culture. The left and the right, in my view, are predominantly individualists in the way they see life. But some of the groups that leftists seek to protect and promote are not individualists. And that isn't so much because of what government has done for them or not done for them. Indeed, the welfare state could be totally eliminated tomorrow, and it would have almost no effect on the cultural differences I'm talking about.
I see.
Most of the non-Western elements in our society come actually from much weaker governments than we have today. They got a whole lot less from government than we give people here, even totally individualist people. See, the thing that's hard for Americans to understand is there's a whole other world out there that doesn't satisfy our normal assumptions. And the reason that we haven't grappled with this successfully is because we insist on regarding everyone as the same. We think everyone is basically an individualist. That's our operating assumption. And that's what we've done in anti-poverty policy. Basically, left and right are quarreling over how to offer more freedom to poor people. They think freedom is the answer. Well, I think actually obligation is the answer. Mm-hmm. That these groups respond better to being expected to do good things like go to work and obey law and so on. Direction is actually more effective. And the reason for that is because they're coming from the non-Western world where people defer to authority. They actually respond more strongly to authority than they do to incentives and opportunities.
Interesting.
See, the idea that opportunities are the answer, that's a Western idea. That's actually quite a demanding idea. And you can't really give people opportunity like that who have decided, for cultural reasons, to assign power to the outside world, not to themselves. Mm-hmm. That is the basic difference between the non-Western and the Western view of the world. Do I think I can do things, or do I wait for the environment to change? And we're up against a cultural conflict between the groups that are oriented to survival and the groups that come from Europe who are oriented to achievement and personal advancement. Now, it doesn't mean there can't be change, and there is change. I mean, as long as some peoples have come to the United States with a more non-Western view of the world, and then they adopt an individualist point of view after they've been here for a while. You see that in the black middle class. Mm-hmm. Part of black America, although it came from Africa, has become individualist. They're just like you and me. Right. They're seeking to work out their salvation in fear and trembling, to use a biblical phrase. And that's thoroughly American. So everyone can join an individual's culture, but it's a struggle to do so because it involves a whole other set of responsibilities that you didn't have before.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to just try to paint this is all I'm trying to do, is like putting a 5 or a 10-year-old in a car and saying, well, everyone knows how to drive. Why don't you know how to drive? Or why don't you want to know how to drive? To it. So what do we, in your view then, and maybe there isn't something we need to do better as a society to expound upon those virtues, maybe instead of standing on the left and the right hollering about whatever it is our particular view of it is, do we need to kind of get behind the wagon and push on what that is?
There are some things we can do. I previously, in earlier work, developed an idea of anti-poverty policy that goes by the name paternalism, where you basically help people, but you also are more directive than we used to do. We say to them, we're not just offering you opportunity. You have to go to work. You have to get through school. You have to speak English. You have to do various good things. And that, we're relying upon the deference to authority that these groups have coming from their original place. And the other thing we can do is we can restrict immigration. I'm in favor of it in principle. We have to cut the numbers. We have to assimilate people more successfully. They have to hear about an individualist way of life. They have to adopt that over time.
Right.
But right now, the numbers are so great that it's a little bit like Latin America's coming to America without really changing. It's simply setting up shop in America where conditions are better, but it still remains a very non-Western way of life. We need to indicate that no, that's not the American way. You need to set some goals and go out and pursue them.
Well, it's interesting because you see some of that in and I worry that the older European immigrant families say, well, we had Little Italy and we had areas, pockets, and they say, well, this Latin area of the town is the same thing, but if it's concocted on this idea of authoritarianism, or even a paternalist view, which almost sounds a little bit like the welfare reform of the 90s.
Well, it was. Yeah. I mean, in my earlier books, I provided the theory behind that reform. What I'm doing in the new book is providing some historical and really philosophic background to why it is that we need to be more directive in dealing with poverty than we have been. It's true. It was, in a way, un-American because we tell people, this is what you have to do. You have to go to work. And that is something we're not used to doing. We think opportunity is enough, that people will drive themselves to go to work. But again, that takes for granted an individual's psychology that is not universal.
Well, it's even, you talk about paternalism, a child, even an American child, as they go through the school system, should be helped to find what it is they're good at so that they can go and find a fulfilling role in the community doing that. And I see what you're saying because, the parent's role, not necessarily, what we would traditionally think is the government's role, but an adult immigrant is going to need that.
Yes. I mean, individualism is not all about freedom and free choice. That is an important dimension of it. But also, there's a moralistic attitude about doing the right thing, obeying common expectations, telling the truth, keeping your promises, obeying the law, paying your taxes. These things are expected. And that is part of individualism, actually, even though it may seem like it's something else. On the contrary, you have to behave well. Now, beyond that, now it's up to you what you do. And a good school inculcates both those things. They promote good behavior, but they also challenge students, even at a very young age, with choices. They put big issues to them. What should we do? What will you do? What do you want to do? These are the questions you face later in life. And that isn't the way the non-Western world operates. Mostly people get told what to do, and they're told what they're supposed to be. No, we leave that up to the individual. And so you need a combination of good training and good behavior, but also you need to be able to deal with the many issues that come to you in a free society, and they don't come to you in a non-free society. In some ways, a life of unfreedom is easier. A lot of these questions get settled for you. You don't have to make any decisions. Well, we expect people to make a lot of decisions, and the dynamism of the society depends on that. So that's the burdens of freedom. Freedom isn't free. Freedom comes with a lot of expectations, mostly to your own goals. The thing that really put the clamps on you and require you to do certain things every day is the goals that you yourself have. And that's why most people who are successful in this country, we think of them having had opportunity, but they also have obligations. In fact, most successful people their lives are entirely consumed fulfilling their obligations. So they're not free in the sense of carefree.
Oh, absolutely.
And that is essential to American life. And what we need to do is produce more individuals who understand life that way, not simply in terms of adjustment, not simply of getting through, not just survival, but who take on responsibilities in pursuit of their own goals. That's the American thing. And that's what we're losing at the bottom half and bottom third, maybe, of society is moving away from that way of life.
I see what you're saying. It's not just freedom to do as you want, but freedom to choose what it is you will do. That's the
choosing what you want is crucial, and that is from that follows the heaviest obligations that you have. I mean, those my obligations when I said I'm going to write a book about all this, and I made that decision like 3-4 years ago, and ever since then I've been working on it. And most people I know are doing the very same thing. They're pursuing their own goals, and they also are burdened by their own goals.
Right.
So that is the American way, and it's that produces the enormous dynamism of this society.
Is it something we can, grasp and turn our society back into something that, and both my in-laws were immigrants from Scotland.
Yeah.
And they talk about, their sponsor, and then the sponsor puts up the money, and then they have a responsibility to the sponsor. Have we lost some of that in our immigration policy, Professor?
I think what we've lost is simply that the people who are now coming, mostly they're not coming from Scotland. By the way, the Scots are the most impressive in some ways of all the British peoples that came here. The Scots are tough as nails, highly individualist, very assertive, very self-reliant. I mean, they are really formidable.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, even through the 18th century are the earliest ones.
Yeah. Oh, no. The British peoples that came here, the Scots are the most formidable. They ended up running the British Empire. I mean, they're really quite remarkable people. But the point is, they had a very individualist temperament coming in here. They didn't have to learn that. They already know about it. So most of the immigrants of 100 years ago were like that. They were coming from Europe, and so they didn't really have a heavy problem assimilating to American life. But today's immigrants are coming from the non-Western world, where they have a very different view of life. For them, it's much harder. They really have to take on the burdens of freedom, and they have to lay down what I call the burdens of necessity. So they're oriented to adjusting to outside pressures, which are often hostile and difficult. And they show enormous stoicism in doing that. It's quite admirable. But you don't get ahead that way. You have to assert goals that require that you move ahead, that you do something that you want to do. And it's that idea that's really quite foreign to the non-Western world. Most people don't think of life that way. The West does think that way, and America thinks that way. And that's why we became this enormous world power. But to keep that, we need to maintain the individual's way of life.
Is there a humanitarian side? I mean, I can hear folks who would argue saying, "Oh, well, that's not fair to do to somebody." But is it actually more humanitarian to say to somebody, "Here is." Here are the rules for our society. Here's what we expect of everybody, and now have at it. That seems to be a more humanitarian approach than just saying,
"Well, it is."
Welcome.
But helping other people is part of an individual's disposition, actually, because the moralism of the culture is one that says you have to do the right thing, and among the right things is helping the less fortunate. So we definitely can have a collective concern about poverty. We can have a sense of community. The moralism is what drives that. It's quite different from the non-Western sense of community, where the individual is really not separate from the society at all. For us, the individual is separate, but the individual can decide that he or she is going to do things to help out people who are less fortunate. So we have this large civic structure outside government where people engage in various good works to help out people. And the communities that we think is most healthy in America are those which have a strong civic structure like that. So the individualist life doesn't mean that you're a loner. On the contrary, cooperate with other people in order to do good works. And that,
I guess,
that's the thing. It's sometimes hard to see how that arises from an individualist temperament, but really comes from the moralism of the sense of what's right and wrong.
Well, Professor Mead, I misstated it enough. I meant not politically, but governmentally humanitarian versus. I mean, I certainly know individually humanitarian. That's the case. But even as a government who wants to welcome people who are seeking, as the Statue of Liberty says, yearning to be free, but just dropping them on a street corner isn't very humanitarian either.
No, that's true. And I think in the old days when immigrants are coming mostly from Europe, they assumed they were going to make their own way. Today's immigrants actually are similar in that they're quite stoic. They don't expect anyone to help them necessarily, but the way they approach life is in terms of survival.
Right.
And that's more limited than was the case 100 years ago. They really have to think more ambitiously about what they can achieve. And especially their children often have trouble getting through school. Now, that isn't true for Asians. Asians are a somewhat separate group, but they also have problems dealing with individualism. They have to decide what they want. And the Asian view of the world is one in which you conform to outside pressures. And that is not America. America is therefore much more innovative. People take more risks. They go out and try to do things that have never been done before.
Well,
that isn't the Asian way generally.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something that's definitely important. Thank you for sharing the book with me. I have a copy of, and I hope other folks can get a copy of it. Is it available online now? Should they go through NYU?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon and also through Encounter Books. They have their own website. You can also get it that way.
Burdens of Freedom is the name of it. Bring it to the beach with you this summer and let people take a look. Professor Mead, thank you for giving me a I don't know what this credit course costs. I know NYU isn't cheap, but I feel like I've gotten a little bit of a free credit course from NYU for it. But I appreciate you sharing some time with us this weekend on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you as well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of this Mother's Day weekend. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, so long, and thanks for all the fish.